The ice in my glass had long since melted, diluting the amber whiskey into a pale, tasteless ghost. I traced a finger through the condensation on the mahogany, drawing a simple tactical pattern: approach, breach, clear. A habit as ingrained as breathing. The bar was a study in muted tones and softer shadows, a place chosen for its anonymity, not its ambience. It was the quiet before. Tomorrow, the briefing. Tomorrow, David Sterling. My reflection shimmered faintly in the dark window pane, superimposed over the rain-slicked street outside. A young woman with high cheekbones and dark hair pulled back in a simple, severe knot. To anyone else, I probably looked like I was waiting for a date, nursing a single drink and my own thoughts. They'd see the face first, the one that didn't belong in a war zone, and they'd make their assumptions. It was a shield I'd learned to wield as effectively as my sidearm. Captain Eva Rostova, 28 years old, a ghost in a world that preferred its soldiers to look the part. The memory surfaced, unbidden and crisp, from 3 weeks ago. The humid, metallic air of a cargo plane, the roar of the engines, a physical thing vibrating in our bones. Sterling's going to be a problem. Mac's voice had been a low rumble, barely audible over the din. He was checking the action on his rifle for the third time, a tell he'd never admit to. At 42, he had lines around his eyes that mapped every hard mission, every lost comrade. My second-in-command, my anchor. "They're all a problem until they're not," I'd replied, my eyes on the mission schematics glowing on a tablet secured to my thigh. "It's the job, Mac. This one's different," thinks the sun shines out his briefcase. He shot a glance at Chen, who was a study in serene focus, running a final diagnostic on his comms suite. "You get anything more on him, kid?" Chen, 31 going on 50 in his preternatural calm, didn't look up. David Sterling, 50 years old, 27 years with the agency. Career analyst who fell into field liaison work, believes in hierarchies and clear-cut boxes. "We," he said, finally meeting Mac's eyes, "do not fit in his boxes." From the opposite bench, Duke Johnson let out a short, sharp laugh. At 29, he was a mountain of coiled intensity, his hands, which could field strip a machine gun in total darkness, gently adjusting the straps on his heavy armor. Screw his boxes. Let him try and put the cap in a box. I'd pay to see that. "The point," Mac said, his voice dropping into that fatherly tone he used when he was genuinely concerned, "is that he's the gatekeeper for this op. If he decides we're not a good fit, based on some stupid. Based on the fact that I don't look like him," I finished for him, my voice even. I looked up from the tablet, meeting each of their gazes, Mac's protective worry, Chen's analytical calm, Duke's fiery loyalty. It's a tactical advantage. He'll be looking at the wrong thing. Let him. The plane had begun its descent then, the shift in pressure pressing down on us. The conversation ended, replaced by the familiar, grim ritual of pre-combat checks, but the seed of Sterling had been planted. That mission was a textbook example of why our unit existed. A high-value humanitarian asset, a doctor, being held by a rogue militia in a compound nestled in the jagged mountains of a country whose name I've already been instructed to forget. Sterling, monitoring from a remote ops center, had been a constant, skeptical voice in our ears. "Rostova, thermal shows a cluster of heat signatures in the east wing. Recommend you divert to the secondary approach." His voice was crisp, condescending, layered with the static of a satellite link. I was already moving, my team a silent extension of my will. I keyed my mic, my voice a whisper. "Those are non-combatants. Intel packet, page 4, servants' quarters. Primary approach is clear." A pause. I could picture him, miles away in a climate-controlled room, frowning at a screen. "The schematic is ambiguous. I'm advising caution." Duke, covering our six, muttered a curse that was probably not meant for the mic. Mac shot him a look that could freeze hell. "Advice noted," I transmitted, not breaking stride. We flowed through the compound's outer perimeter like smoke, Chen disabling a crude alarm system with a flick of a device in his hand. The trust was absolute, unspoken. They didn't need me to explain. They knew I had seen the same data he had simply processed it faster, understood the terrain better. They trusted my reads, my instincts, implicitly, because I was right. Always. The breach of the main building was a symphony of controlled violence. My signals, small, precise hand gestures, were all it took. Mac took the door, Duke laid down suppressing fire down the hallway, and Chen peeled off to secure the comms room. I moved to the target room, the doctor's frightened eyes meeting mine through the gloom. It was over in less than 90 seconds. Sterling's commentary had ceased, replaced by a stunned silence as we exfiltrated, the doctor in tow, back to the exfiltration point. Later, during the debrief, Sterling had tried to claim the secondary approach as his own suggested course of action. Mac had simply stared him down, his expression granite. The captain's call was the right call, as always. There was no arguing with Mac when he used that tone. It was the end of the discussion. Sitting in the bar, the memory faded, leaving me with the lingering taste of that small, hollow victory. Sterling's skepticism hadn't been defeated, it had just been temporarily suppressed. And now he was being assigned as our direct liaison for the most sensitive mission of our careers. An operation so politically charged it had no official name, just a file designation: Chimera. A man slid onto the stool next to me, disrupting my reverie. He was in his late 40s, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, and he carried the expansive confidence of someone used to being heard. "Rough day?" he asked, his smile too wide, his eyes doing that quick, dismissive scan I knew so well. He saw a woman alone, and he saw an opportunity. I gave him a small, non-committal smile, something like that. "Let me guess," he leaned in, smelling of expensive cologne and older whiskey. "Corporate lawyer? No, wait, PR, you've got that polished look." I took a slow sip of my watered-down drink, not even close. He chuckled, a sound meant to be charming. "Come on, a woman like you in a place like this? You're either waiting for someone who stood you up or you're in town for a conference. I'm going with conference. Marketing." This was the dance, the gentle, persistent underestimation. Normally, I'd have shut it down with a few cold words, but tonight, a strange weariness held me back. It was the weight of tomorrow, of Sterling, of Chimera. This man's ignorance was a banal echo of the professional prejudice I was about to face on a global scale. "I'm in logistics," I said, which was technically true, if you considered leading a special forces team a form of extreme logistics. Logistics, well, that's practical. His interest seemed to wane slightly, but he recovered, leaning closer. "Look, my friends are over at the booth. Why don't you ditch that sad-looking drink and join us? Much more fun than sitting here all by yourself." His hand, large and slightly damp, came to rest on my forearm. It was a small gesture, but it crossed a line. My entire body went still. The noise of the bar seemed to recede, replaced by a high-pitched hum in my ears. In my mind's eye, I saw a dozen ways to break his wrist, dislocate his shoulder, put him on the floor before he could even process what was happening. The training was a live wire, always humming just beneath the skin. But that wasn't the play, not here, not now. I slowly, deliberately, looked down at his hand until he withdrew it with an awkward laugh. "I'm fine here," I said, my voice low and flat, "and I'm not alone." He smirked, looking around the empty stools. "Could have fooled me. Come on, don't be like that. A little company never hurt anyone." It was then that the atmosphere in the bar shifted. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't seen them enter, but I felt it. A change in pressure, a subtle realignment of the space. The man beside me must have seen the shift in my expression because he followed my gaze toward the entrance. And he froze. Mac stood just inside the door, his broad frame blocking the light from the street. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just scanning the room, but his presence was like a boulder in a stream. Dressed in a simple dark Henley and jeans, he still looked every inch the master sergeant, the gravity of his experience radiating from him. A few steps behind, Chen and Duke fanned out. Chen, in a neat jacket, looked like a graduate student, but his eyes were missing nothing, calmly assessing every exit, every person. Duke, in a tight t-shirt that strained over his chest and arms, looked exactly like what he was, a man you did not want to cross. His gaze locked onto the man next to me, and his jaw tightened. They didn't move toward me. They didn't need to. Their arrival was a statement, a silent, powerful correction of the man's mistaken assumption. They were my company. This was my team. The man paled. The smug confidence evaporated from his face, replaced by a sudden, primal understanding that he had profoundly misjudged the situation. He looked from their stony faces back to me, and for the first time, he really saw me. Not the woman he thought I was, but the one I am. The one who commanded men like this. I think I see my friends, he stammered, sliding off the stool so quickly he almost stumbled. He retreated to his booth without another word, not looking back. Mac ambled over, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he took the now vacant stool. "Trouble, Captain." "Nothing I couldn't handle," I said, the tension leaching from my shoulders. Their presence was a tangible relief. Duke came up behind me, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Looked like a real charmer. You want me to have a word with him?" He cracked his knuckles for emphasis. "Stand down, Duke," I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time that night. "He's not worth the energy." Chen simply nodded at me, a ghost of a smile on his own lips, then took up a position at the end of the bar, his back to the wall, facing the door. Always on watch. The bartender, a grizzled man who had seen it all, brought over a fresh whiskey for me, the ice cubes firm and new. He didn't say a word, just gave Mac a respectful nod and moved away. Mac picked up my old, diluted glass and pushed the new one toward me. "You ready for tomorrow?" I took a sip of the fresh whiskey, the burn a welcome sensation. "Sterling will be waiting. He's probably already written his assessment. Team lead, while seemingly competent, lacks the requisite gravitas for an operation of this magnitude." I pitched my voice into a poor imitation of Sterling's smug cadence. Mac grunted. "Let him talk. He's a suit who spent his career playing with maps and reports. We live in the dirt he draws lines on." He fixed me with a steady look. "We know who you are, Eva. That's all that matters." And that was the core of it, the unshakable truth. In a world of shifting alliances and political games, their faith was my bedrock. Duke's passionate defense, Chen's quiet certainty, Mac's unwavering loyalty. They were my family, forged in fire and bound by a trust deeper than blood. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the four of us occupying our little island of calm in the bar. There was no need for lengthy discussions about Chimera, no rehashing of tactics. We were all running the same scenarios in our heads, preparing for the same storm. The briefing tomorrow was just a formality. The real work, the real understanding, existed between us, in the spaces between words. Finally, I set my glass down, the whiskey finished. "Let's go," I said, standing. "Big day tomorrow." They fell in around me without a word. Mac on my right, Duke on my left, Chen a step behind. As we walked out into the cool night air, the man from the bar watched us go, his face a mixture of fear and bewildered respect. He had seen the mask, and for a fleeting second, he had glimpsed the reality beneath. The city lights blurred around me as we walked to our vehicles. The quiet was over. Tomorrow, the dance would begin again, this time on a much larger, more dangerous stage. But walking with my team flanking me, their solid presence a shield against the world, I felt a familiar calm settle over me. Let Sterling doubt. Let the world underestimate. It was the space in which we operated best. It was the advantage we would use to win. The air in the briefing room was a sterile cocktail of chilled, recycled air and the faint, acrid scent of burnt coffee from the perpetually malfunctioning machine down the hall. It was a smell I associated with waiting, with the tense, silent moments before the storm of an operation. 1 week had passed since I'd sat in that bar, turning a stranger's dismissal over in my mind like a smooth, worn stone. That stone had now become a boulder, and its name was David Sterling. He stood at the head of the polished composite table, a man who wore his 50 years and his agency authority like a custom-tailored suit. It was impeccable, but it didn't quite fit the room. Here, in the heart of a Special Forces forward operating base, the currency was grit, not gloss. My team felt it. Mac, to my right, had his massive arms crossed, his posture a silent sermon on the virtue of patience that he was clearly failing to practice. Chen was a statue, his fingers steepled under his chin, his dark eyes absorbing every data point on the large smart screen behind Sterling. Duke, on my left, was a live wire, his knee bouncing under the table with a restless energy that threatened to shake the entire structure. Sterling cleared his throat, a sound meant to command attention. It worked, but not in the way he intended. It was like a starter's pistol, signaling the beginning of a contest he didn't yet know he was losing. "As outlined in your preliminary dossiers," Sterling began, his voice a dry, condescending monotone, "the objective is the extraction of a high-value individual, codenamed Nightingale, from a fortified compound outside Mazar-i-Sharif. The principal challenge, as I'm sure even your team can appreciate, Captain Rostova, is the network of local militias with shifting allegiances. It's a delicate political situation. He said even your team with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis, a verbal pat on the head. I saw Duke's jaw tighten. I kept my own expression neutral, a placid lake hiding the tectonic shift of irritation beneath. I appreciate the context, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice calm, cutting through his preamble without aggression. However, my team specializes in delicate political situations. Perhaps we could move to the structural analysis of the compound itself. The human terrain is fluid, but the walls and guard schedules are not. Sterling's smile was thin, patronizing. Of course, eager to get to the action, a commendable if somewhat predictable impulse. He clicked a button on his remote, and a detailed schematic of a large, walled residence filled the screen. The compound, satellite imagery and limited human suggest a garrison of 30 to 40 armed combatants, standard patrol patterns here and here. He used a laser pointer, the red dot wobbling slightly. The main house, where we believe Nightingale is being held, is here. Heavy fortification. I leaned forward, my eyes tracing the lines of the blueprint. It was a good layout, designed by someone who knew their business. But every design has a flaw, you just have to be patient enough to find it. The patrol patterns are a decoy, I said, more to myself than to him. Sterling's laser dot froze. I beg your pardon. The patterns you've highlighted, I clarified, gesturing toward the screen. They're too perfect, too by the book. They're for show. Look at the wear patterns on the ground here, visible in the geosynced satellite pass from last Thursday. I stood and walked to the screen, ignoring his startled expression. I pointed to faint, almost invisible tracks leading away from the main path. The real security is lighter, more mobile. They're using the obvious patrols to draw attention away from these quick reaction teams stationed here, here, and here. I tapped 3 points near smaller, less conspicuous outbuildings. They're expecting a conventional assault. They've built a trap. The room was silent for a moment. Chen gave a barely perceptible nod, his fingers already flying across his tablet, pulling up the specific satellite pass I'd referenced. Mac's stern expression softened into something resembling pride. Sterling recovered quickly, his condescension hardening into something sharper. That's an interesting theory, Captain, a creative interpretation of some rather ambiguous dirt paths, but we have to work with confirmed intelligence, not hunches. He spat the last word as if it were distasteful. My analysis, backed by years of regional expertise, indicates a standard stronghold defense. We go in hard and fast, overwhelm the perimeter, and extract the asset. That hard and fast approach would land us directly in their kill zone, I said, my tone still even, though I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. I was 28, but in that moment, I felt the weight of every one of Sterling's 50 years of prejudice pressing down on me. He didn't see a captain, he saw a girl playing soldier. We'd lose the initiative before we even breached the outer wall. With all due respect, Captain, Sterling said, and the phrase was so empty it echoed, this is a complex strategic operation. Perhaps it would be beneficial to defer to the broader strategic picture painted by the agency. We have a wider lens. That was when Duke broke. He uncrossed his arms, the movement loud in the tense quiet. With all due respect, sir, he echoed, loading the words with a very different meaning. Captain Rostova's hunches have kept this team alive through 6 tour. I'll take her read on a dirt path over 100 pages of your confirmed intelligence any day. Sterling's eyes narrowed, flicking from Duke to me. The challenge was now out in the open, a line drawn in the sand of the polished floor. Sergeant Johnson, your loyalty is noted, but this is not a matter of sentiment. It's a matter of cold, hard facts. And the fact is, this mission's success hinges on following a disciplined, agency-approved plan, not deviating on a whim. Mac placed a calming hand on Duke's forearm, a silent command to stand down. He then turned his steady gaze to Sterling. Mr. Sterling, the captain's assessment is tactically sound. We've operated in similar environments. The enemy adapts, so must we. Adaptation is one thing, reckless improvisation is another. Sterling's gaze was fixed on me. I need to be certain that the field commander for this operation has the requisite fortitude to stick to the mission parameters when the pressure is on. This isn't a training exercise. The implication hung in the air, thicker than the smell of bad coffee. He was questioning my nerve, my very right to lead. The bar incident flashed in my mind, the man's smug dismissal, the assumption that I belonged anywhere but in command. This was the same song, just a different verse. I felt the collective tension of my team coiling around me, a protective barrier. But I didn't need protection. I needed him to see. I walked back to my seat, not breaking eye contact with him. The mission parameters are to extract Nightingale alive, my only parameter. How we achieve that is a matter of tactical calculus, not bureaucratic box-ticking. You've provided the what, Mr. Sterling. My team will determine the how. That is our job. If that arrangement is unacceptable, I suggest you find another team. The silence that followed was absolute. I had just refused to yield, politely but unequivocally. Sterling's face was a mask of controlled fury. He had expected capitulation, or at least a debate he could dominate. He had not expected a wall. "Very well, Captain," he said finally, the words clipped. "Proceed with your calculus, but I will be auditing every step. This briefing is adjourned." He snatched his classified folder from the table and strode out of the room without a backward glance. The door hissed shut behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Duke let out a low whistle. "God damn, Cap," you shoved his broader strategic picture right down his throat. Chen allowed himself a small, tight smile. "The satellite pass from Thursday, the one with the cloud cover he said was unusable, you had it preloaded." "I had a hunch," I said, the ghost of a smile touching my own lips. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving a hollow, shaky feeling in its wake. The confrontation was necessary, but it was draining. Mac waited until the others had quieted down. His eyes, old and knowing, searched mine. "He's not going to let this go, Eva. You know that. He'll be looking for any excuse to pull you or to take operational control himself." "I know," I said, gathering my own notes. The weight of Sterling's doubt was a physical thing now, a leaden cloak on my shoulders. Which is why we need to be perfect. Flawless. Let's get to work. I want a full-terrain model built in the sim room. Chen, I need you to pull every intercept, every signal ping from that grid for the last 72 hours. Duke, start running loadouts for a soft entry profile. Mac with me. The team moved with the practiced ease of a single organism, the brief tension of the briefing already channeled into action. This was our language. This was where we were fluent. An hour later, Mac found me in the equipment cage, ostensibly checking the action on a new suppressed carbine. The metal was cool and familiar in my hands, a simple problem with a simple solution. Clean it, oil it, it works. Unlike people. "He got under your skin," Mac said, not a question but a statement of fact. He leaned against the wire mesh doorway, his large frame blocking the light from the corridor. I didn't look up from the weapon. "He's an obstacle. We deal with obstacles." "We do," Mac agreed. "But some obstacles are louder in your head than others." He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man handling explosives. "You know, when they first assigned you to us, there were whispers. A 26-year-old captain, a woman, taking over a team of grizzled bastards like us. Some of the guys thought it was a PR move." I finally looked at him. This was a story he'd never told me. "What did you think?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "I thought they were fools," he said, his gaze steady. "I saw your file. I saw the results from the Joint Readiness Training Center. But more than that, I saw the way you carried yourself. You didn't try to be one of the boys. You didn't try to be louder or tougher. You were just competent. Quietly, relentlessly competent. And you earned every ounce of respect this team has for you, not by demanding it, but by deserving it. Sterling, he's just noise. The same kind of noise we heard on day one. And we proved that wrong then. We'll prove it wrong now." The simple, unwavering faith in his words was a balm. He was right. This wasn't new. It was just a different face on an old enemy. I slid the bolt carrier group back into the receiver with a satisfying click. "He thinks fortitude is about following orders," I said, snapping the upper and lower receivers together. "He doesn't understand that it's about making the right decision when all the orders are wrong." "That's why he's a liaison and you're the team leader," Mac said, pushing off the doorway. "We're with you, Eva, all the way, you just point the target." He left me there in the dim light, surrounded by the clean, metallic smell of oil and steel. His words echoed, but so did Sterling's. They fought a war in the quiet of my mind. Later, in the stark solitude of my quarters, the noise finally won. The door clicked shut, and the professional calm I'd maintained all day evaporated. The room was small, impersonal, a cot, a desk, a single bare bulb overhead. It was a cell for the person I was between missions, a space where Captain Rostova could recede and Eva could surface. And Eva was tired. The weight of the doubt wasn't just Sterling S. It was the cumulative weight of every sideways glance, every condescending smile, every assumption that I was someone's assistant, someone's daughter, anything but the person in charge. I sat on the edge of the cot, the thin mattress offering no comfort, and dropped my face into my hands. The image of Sterling's smug face, the memory of his voice questioning my fortitude, played on a loop. Was he right? Was I too young? Too unimpressive? In the mirror bolted to the wall, I saw a young woman with features that could just as easily belong to a graduate student as a special forces team leader. I saw the face that had made the man in the bar assume I was waiting for a date. This was my weapon, I reminded myself. This was the shield that made enemies underestimate me. But tonight, it felt like a cage. I closed my eyes and forced myself back to the bar. Not to the dismissal, but to the feeling that had followed. The cold, clear certainty that had settled over me. That man's judgment had been a spark, and it had lit a fire that burned away all uncertainty. Sterling was doing the same thing. He was handing me some of the purest fuel imaginable, the righteous anger of being judged unfairly. A slow smile spread across my face, there in the dark. That was it. That was the answer. He wanted to see fortitude. He was about to get a masterclass. I stood up and walked to the mirror again. This time, I saw past the reflection. I saw the mind that had dissected the compound's defenses in seconds. I saw the will that had forged a team of elite soldiers into a family. I saw the resolve that had been tempered in a dozen firefights. Sterling saw a face. My team saw a leader. And I, finally, saw the truth. His doubt wasn't my burden, it was his weakness. I had a mission to plan, a team to lead, an asset to save, and a smug CIA liaison to prove spectacularly wrong. The weight was still there, but now it felt familiar. It felt like purpose. I picked up my data slate from the desk, the screen glowing with the compound schematics. The night was young, and I had work to do. The dust tasted like chalk and diesel fuel, a fine grit that settled on my tongue no matter how tightly I sealed my lips. 2 months of waiting, 2 months of planning had culminated in this. The oppressive silence of a moonless Afghan night, the only sounds the soft crunch of our boots on hard-packed earth, and the low whistle of the wind through the skeletal trees. The compound, our objective, was a dark smudge against the deeper black of the mountains, just as Sterling's satellite images had shown. But something in the pit of my stomach, a cold, coiling tension that had nothing to do with pre-mission jitters, told me the images were the only thing he'd gotten right. Ghost One, this is Watchtower. Sitrep. Sterling's voice crackled in my ear, tinny and officious even through the encrypted comms. He was safe in a climate-controlled operations center in Doha, 1,000 miles and a whole universe away from the tension constricting my chest. I keyed my mic, my voice a low murmur. Watchtower, Ghost One, in position at phase line Alpha. No sign of patrols. Perimeter appears static. I lowered my night vision monocular, the world flaring into a ghostly green panorama. The compound walls were high, topped with coiled razor wire that glittered like malevolent lace. According to Sterling's flawless intelligence, there should have been 2 guards at the main gate, lazy and inattentive. There were 4, and they moved with a sharp, professional vigilance that set my teeth on edge. Copy, Ghost One. You are cleared to proceed. Remember, speed and silence. The window is tight. Sterling's tone was that of a man reading from a script he'd written himself, utterly convinced of its perfection. Max Bulk shifted beside me, a solid, reassuring presence in the dark. Even through the green glow of my NVGs, I could see the skepticism etched on his weathered face. 4 guards, Captain, he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Intel said 2, and these boys don't look like they're pulling a double shift for overtime. I see them, Mac. I scanned the walls again. The wrongness was a physical weight now. 2 months ago, Sterling had laid out a neat package, a lightly guarded compound, a predictable militia, a straightforward in and out. He pointed to thermal scans showing minimal heat signatures. But the air here hummed with a latent energy, the kind generated by many men trying very hard to be quiet. Chen's calm voice cut through the silence on our private team channel. Ghost 2, picking up encrypted comms traffic from inside the compound. Low-power burst transmission, not militia chatter, professional grade. A pause, the soft tap of keys audible even through his muffled headset. Pattern suggests tactical team comms. My blood ran cold. A tactical team. Sterling's intelligence wasn't just flawed, it was a goddamn trap. The unpredictable local militias were a cover for a professional security detail, probably Wagner or a similar PMC. Nightingale wasn't just being hidden, he was being used as bait. "Watchtower, Ghost 1, I said, forcing my voice to remain level. "We have a discrepancy. 4 guards on the gate, professional bearing. Ghost 2 reports encrypted tactical comms inside the compound. Request permission to abort and reassess." The silence from Sterling's end was longer than it should have been. When he spoke, his voice was laced with condescending patience, the sound of a man explaining basic arithmetic to a child. "Ghost 1, your request is denied. You're seeing shadows. The asset is time-sensitive. The guards are likely just reinforced. Proceed with the mission as briefed." I looked at Mac. In the green light, his eyes were hard. He gave a minute shake of his head. He didn't need to say it. Going in there now was suicide. Duke's voice, a low growl, came over the team net. "He's sending us into a meat grinder, Cap." They were all waiting. My team, my responsibility. 2 months of Sterling's smug superiority, his glances that lingered a second too long on my face, assessing, dismissing. He saw a young woman, an anomaly in a world of hardened men. He never saw the captain. In that moment, the chain of command felt like a noose. Obeying him wasn't just career suicide, it was a death sentence for the 4 best soldiers I'd ever known. The decision crystallized in an instant, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It wasn't rebellion, it was duty. I switched to the team-only frequency. "Ghost team, this is 1. Sterling's intel is compromised. The compound is a trap. We are not proceeding with the original plan." I took a breath, the words feeling both treasonous and utterly right. "We are executing contingency Gamma. Acknowledge." Contingency Gamma was something we'd wargamed in a fugue state of boredom during the long wait. A worst-case scenario we'd dreamed up half as a joke. It was audacious, messy, and relied entirely on chaos and the enemy's inability to believe anyone would be stupid enough to try it. Mac was the first to respond, his voice solid as granite. "Ghost 5 acknowledged, Gamma it is." His immediate, unhesitating support was a bolt of strength straight to my core. "Ghost 2 acknowledged," Chen said. Already I could hear the rapid clicking as he reconfigured his gear. "Ghost 4 acknowledged. Hell yeah," Duke rumbled, the fierce grin audible in his whisper. "Watchtower, Ghost 1, I said, my voice now stripped of all deference. "The intelligence is faulty. We are compromised. I am altering the mission parameters to ensure operational success and team survival." Sterling's voice exploded in my ear, losing all pretense of calm. "Captain Rostova, that is a direct order. You will proceed. This is a catastrophic breach of protocol." "The catastrophic breach was your intelligence, Sterling," I said, cutting the transmission to Doha. He was noise now, a distraction. The only reality was the compound, the trap, and my team. "Chen, I need a distraction, something loud on the north side. Duke, you're with me. We're going in through the sewer access point we spotted on the recon flyover. Mac, you're our angel. Find high ground and keep the sky clear." There was a flurry of movement. Chen melted into the shadows, a ghost even among ghosts. Mac clapped a hand on my shoulder, a brief, crushing gesture, then moved off to find a perch with a clear field of fire. Duke fell in beside me, his large frame suddenly fluid and silent. We moved low and fast, circling wide to the east where a dry riverbed offered cover. The sewer access was exactly where we'd seen it, a rusted iron grate half buried in the bank. The stench that wafted up was biblical, a thick miasma of decay and human waste. "Charming," Duke muttered, heaving the grate aside with a muffled grunt. "After you," I said, and he dropped into the blackness without a second's hesitation. I followed, the darkness swallowing us whole. We slogged through a shallow stream of filth, our NVGs rendering the tunnel a nightmare of green slime and crumbling brick. The only sound was our ragged breathing and the squelch of our boots. Sterling's voice was a distant, buzzing insect in my ear, demanding, threatening. I ignored it. After 100 meters, a vertical shaft appeared, a rusted ladder leading up. This was the gamble. It should have emerged into a courtyard near the main building where Nightingale was supposedly held. "Ghost 2 in position," Chen's calm voice reported. "Light it up," I ordered. The world above us erupted. A tremendous explosion shook the ground, dust and debris raining down the shaft. Chen had somehow turned something, a generator, a fuel dump, into a very convincing diversion. Alarms began to wail, and shouted orders in Russian and Pashto echoed from above. The trap had been sprung, but we weren't in the killing zone. "Go, go, go," I hissed. Duke went up the ladder like a bear climbing a tree, bursting out of the manhole cover and into the chaotic courtyard. I followed, blinking in the sudden flare of emergency lights and the orange glow of the fire Chen had started. The scene was pandemonium. Militia fighters and professional soldiers in mismatched camouflage ran towards the north wall, shouting and firing wildly into the darkness. We moved like a single organism, Duke providing a wall of covering fire while I scanned the buildings. There. A 2-story structure with a single light on in an upstairs window, and 2 more professional-looking guards stationed firmly at its door while the rest of the world burned. That was it. "Target building, northwest corner," I said into the team net. "Duke, suppress, I'm going in." "Cap, wait," Duke began, but I was already moving, using the chaos as my shield. I was smaller, faster, less of a target. I darted from shadow to shadow, a phantom in the flickering light. The 2 guards at the door were disciplined, their attention split between the diversion and their post. I couldn't take them both quietly. A sharp crack echoed from the walls above. One of the guards crumpled. "Mac!" A second crack and the other man spun around, grabbing his shoulder. My angel was watching. I kicked the door in, sweeping the room with my rifle. It was empty, a barren anteroom. A set of stairs led upward. I took them 2 at a time, my heart hammering against my ribs. At the top was a single door. I didn't bother with tactics. I blew the lock with a single round and slammed the door open. The man sitting calmly behind a simple wooden desk was not what I expected. He was slender, dressed in a crisp, clean shalwar camis, with a pair of wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He looked like a university professor, not a high-value asset codenamed Nightingale. And he wasn't alone. A mountain of a man, clearly ex-Spetsnaz from his bearing and the tattoo peeking from his collar, stood beside him, a Stetkin machine pistol held loosely in his hand. He raised it, a cruel smile on his lips. I had my rifle trained on him, but he had the drop. In that frozen second, I saw it in his eyes, the assessment, the dismissal, a woman, a small one at that. He saw a problem he could solve with brute force. "Do not move," the big man said in heavily accented English. This was the final card, the one Sterling's prejudice had dealt me. I let my posture soften ever so slightly, allowed a flicker of what he would read as fear to cross my face. I lowered my rifle barrel a fraction, a gesture of uncertainty. His smile widened. He took a step forward, confident, already victorious. "American girl playing soldier," he sneered. "You come a long way to die." It was the opening I needed. As he shifted his weight, his focus entirely on the easy kill, I moved, not away but forward. I dropped my rifle, letting it hang on its sling, and closed the distance in a blur. His eyes widened in surprise as I ducked under his gun arm. I drove the heel of my hand up into his elbow, feeling the joint hyperextend with a sickening pop. The Stetkin clattered to the floor. He roared in pain and rage, swinging his other arm like a club. I pivoted, using his momentum, and slammed him headfirst into the stone wall. He slid down, unconscious. The whole thing took less than 3 seconds. I turned, drawing my sidearm and aiming it at the man behind the desk. He hadn't moved. He simply watched me, an unreadable expression on his face. "Nightingale?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through my veins. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "And you are the one they sent to retrieve me?" He glanced at the hulking form of his former guard. "They did not tell me it would be you." "No one ever does," I said, grabbing a zip tie from my kit and securing the guard's hands. "We have to move, now." I guided Nightingale down the stairs and out into the courtyard. The fire was still burning, but the initial chaos was giving way to organized search patterns. Duke provided covering fire as we sprinted for the sewer access. We tumbled back into the filth, Duke pulling the grate shut behind us. The exfiltration was a blur of motion and suppressed panic. We met Chen at the rally point, then Mac, who descended from his perch with the calm efficiency of a man returning from a stroll. We moved fast, eating up the kilometers between us and the extraction point as the sky began to lighten to a dirty gray in the east. Sterling's voice was a constant, frantic presence in my ear during the long run, shifting from threats to demands for a sitrep. I said nothing. Let him sweat. Let him sit in his sterile room and contemplate the absolute silence from a team he had written off. As the familiar thump-thump-thump of our extraction helicopter grew from a whisper to a roar, I finally keyed my mic, switching back to the command frequency. Watchtower Ghost 1. Rostova, report, what is your status? Sterling's voice was frayed, stripped of all its smug authority. I looked at my team. Mac gave me a slow, proud nod. Duke was grinning like a wolf. Chen's expression was, as always, serene, but there was a sharp glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Nightingale sat huddled between them, alive, silent. Watchtower, Ghost 1. Mission accomplished. Asset is secure. Ghost team is returning to base. I paused, letting the static fill the space for a moment, a silence that contained the roar of the exploding diversion, the stench of the sewer, the crack of Mac's rifle, and the stunned look in the Spetsnaz guard's eyes. You can tell command the package is delivered, and you can tell them their intelligence was worth exactly what we paid for it. I didn't wait for a reply. The helicopter settled onto the dusty ground, its rotors whipping up a storm. As we climbed aboard, the sun finally broke over the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, painting the harsh landscape in hues of rose and gold. I strapped in beside Mac, the weight of command no longer a burden but a mantle I wore with a quiet, formidable certainty. Sterling's voice was gone, replaced by the thunder of the engines, the only sound that mattered. We were going home. The scent of antiseptic and old coffee was a world away from the acrid dust of the Kunar province. 1 month. It felt like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The debriefing room at Fort Meade was aggressively neutral, all gray carpets, polished wood, and a lingering chill from the overzealous air conditioning. I sat at the long table, my dress uniform stiff and unfamiliar against my skin, the silver bars on my shoulders feeling heavier than my usual body armor. Across from me, the review board members sat in a solemn line, their faces a spectrum of detached appraisal. But my focus, my true opposition, sat at the end of their table. David Sterling, looking perfectly pressed and utterly sure of himself, shuffled a neat stack of papers. He didn't look at me, but I could feel the weight of his condescension like a physical pressure. This was his theater, and he was about to present his case against the reckless, disobedient captain who had nearly derailed a critical mission. Colonel Hemsworth, a man with a jawline that looked carved from granite and eyes that had seen too many PowerPoint presentations, opened the proceedings. Captain Rostova, he began, his voice a low rumble. This board is convened to review your actions during Operation Midnight Lance, specifically your decision to disregard a direct order from your designated CIA liaison, Mr. Sterling, to proceed with the primary objective. The charges are insubordination and willful deviation from authorized mission parameters. How do you plead? I kept my back straight, my hands resting flat on the cool table. With all due respect, sir, I do not plead to charges. I stand by my actions as necessary for the successful completion of the mission and the preservation of my team's lives. Sterling couldn't suppress a soft, derisive snort. He leaned forward, a thin smile playing on his lips. Necessary, Captain. You were given intelligence, vetted and confirmed, that indicated a minimal garrison. You were ordered to execute a swift surgical extraction. Instead, you froze. You allowed your team to, what was the term you used, Master Sergeant Mac Allister? Lay low and observe. He glanced at Mac, who sat stoically to my right. Mac's voice was a low growl devoid of any warmth. The term was accurate, sir. The intelligence on the ground was faulty. 4 alert guards, not 2, signs of recent heavy vehicle traffic. The entire valley felt wrong. Felt wrong, Sterling repeated, turning the phrase over like a rotten piece of fruit. We are not in the business of feelings, Master Sergeant. We are in the business of facts. Satellite imagery, thermal scans, signals intelligence. The facts, as we presented them, were clear. With respect, Mr. Sterling, I interjected, my voice calm, cutting through his smugness. The facts on the ground were clearer. Your intelligence missed the 20-plus hostile combatants sleeping in a camouflaged bunker 50 yards from the target building. It missed the heavy machine gun emplacement overlooking the only viable approach route. Had we proceeded as ordered, my team would have walked directly into a kill zone. The room was silent for a moment. One of the other board members, a sharp-eyed woman with a general's star on her shoulder, leaned in. "Captain, can you substantiate this claim?" This was our opening. I gave a slight nod to Chen, who sat to my left. He was the picture of calm, his fingers moving silently over a secure tablet. A moment later, the large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. "Sergeant Chen has compiled the mission data," I said. The helmet cam footage from my initial perimeter scan, timestamped to show the 4 guards in heightened alert status. The enhanced audio feed, capturing the distinct sound of Pashto being spoken from a direction where your thermal scans showed only cold ground. And finally, the drone footage from our Raven, which we launched on my authority after establishing a perimeter. The room watched as the grainy, green-tinted video played out. There was my own viewpoint, the crosshairs sweeping over the compound. The guards were anything but lazy. They moved with a purpose, their heads on a swivel. Then came Chen's audio enhancement, isolating the faint voices. But the clincher was the drone footage. It showed the barren hillside, then, as Chen applied a filter, the outline of a cleverly constructed bunker door, almost invisible to the naked eye, materialized on the screen. "The bunker was confirmed upon assault," Chen stated, his voice even and factual. 23 hostiles, arms for a small platoon. The mission parameters were compromised before we even reached the objective. Sterling's face had lost some of its color. This footage could have been misinterpreted, the stress of the situation. It was Duke who spoke next, his voice a controlled thunder that vibrated in the small room. "Misinterpreted, sir? We assaulted that bunker on the captain's order. We neutralized the threat before moving on the primary target. The HVT was secured without a single casualty on our side, because the captain saw what your satellites didn't. She saw the trap." He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. The evidence was irrefutable. For the next hour, we walked the board through the entire operation. Mac detailing the flawless execution of the revised assault plan. Chen explaining the electronic countermeasures that prevented the enemy from calling in reinforcements. Duke describing the precise, overwhelming force used to secure the bunker. They spoke with a professional clarity that was more powerful than any emotional defense. They were my team, and their testimony was a wall of unshakable fact and mutual trust. Sterling tried to regain ground, questioning the unnecessary risk of the bunker assault, arguing that we could have withdrawn. But his arguments sounded hollow and desperate next to the reality of a mission accomplished against impossible odds. Finally, Colonel Hemsworth held up a hand. "I think we've heard enough." He looked at Sterling, then at me, his granite features unreadable. "The board will adjourn to deliberate. Captain Rostova, Master Sergeant, you are dismissed. Wait outside." We filed out into the sterile hallway, the heavy door clicking shut behind us. The silence was thick. Mac leaned against the wall, pulling a toothpick from his pocket and sticking it in the corner of his mouth. "Well," he grunted, "that went about as expected." Duke clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You crushed it, Cap." Sterling looked like he'd just swallowed a bug. Chen simply gave me a small, rare smile, a silent message of solidarity that meant more than any words. We didn't have to wait long. Perhaps only 20 minutes passed before the door opened and a sergeant major gestured us back in. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The board members were exchanging quiet, satisfied nods. Sterling sat slumped in his chair, staring at the table as if the polished wood contained the secrets of his utter defeat. Colonel Hemsworth stood. "Captain Rostova, this board has reviewed the evidence and testimony. The findings are as follows. The charges of insubordination are dismissed. Your actions, while constituting a deviation from the initial order, were justified by the immediate and credible threat to your team and the mission objectives. Furthermore, your leadership and tactical acumen in adapting to the fluid combat situation are to be commended. Operation Midnight Lance is hereby classified as an overwhelming success. This board is adjourned." The formal words hung in the air. It was over. We had won. The board members stood and began to file out, a few of them offering me curt, respectful nods as they passed. Sterling remained seated, gathering his papers with trembling hands. As my team moved toward the door, exchanging quiet, relieved words, I lingered. I watched Sterling for a moment, this man who had judged me from the second we met in that loud DC bar 3 months ago. He had seen a young woman, an attractive face he couldn't reconcile with the rank on her uniform. He had seen a liability. He finally looked up, and the smugness was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out confusion. The absolute certainty that had defined him was shattered. "It wasn't personal, Sterling," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the empty room. He flinched as if the sound of his name was an accusation. "Wasn't it? You enjoyed that, didn't you? Proving the old dinosaur wrong." I took a step closer, not to intimidate, but to ensure he heard every word. "No, I didn't enjoy it. I needed you to be right. I prayed your flawless intelligence was actually flawless. Because if it was wrong, my team was dead. This wasn't about you and me. It was about the 18 men and women under my command. It's always about them." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time. He saw past the face he'd initially dismissed, past the gender he'd clearly viewed as a handicap. He saw the officer who had carried the weight of that decision, the fear that had been a cold knot in her stomach for 6 hours in that dusty valley, the absolute resolve that had forged a new path to victory. He started, then stopped. He shook his head, a slow, weary gesture. The data was perfect. It made perfect sense. "The map is not the territory," I said, repeating the old adage we lived by. "You trusted the map. I had to trust the ground under my boots." There was no victory in his eyes, only a dawning, uncomfortable realization. A paradigm shift. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, then gathered his briefcase and walked out of the room without another word. He wasn't converted, not really. But the foundation of his arrogance had been cracked. He would have to rebuild his worldview, and whether he included people like me in it remained to be seen. For now, it was enough. I walked out of the building into the late afternoon sun. My team was waiting for me by the car, a familiar constellation of loyalty. Mac was on the phone, probably to his wife, his voice a low, comforting rumble. Duke and Chen were leaning against the hood, arguing good-naturedly about the merits of some new rifle attachment. They fell silent as I approached. Duke's face split into a wide grin. So, what did the suit have to say for himself? "Nothing of consequence," I said, feeling the tension of the last month finally begin to seep from my shoulders. "He's reassessing his life choices." Mac ended his call and shoved his phone in his pocket. "Good. Now that the formalities are over, I believe there's a booth at the Dixie Donut with our name on it. I'm starving." The Dixie Donut was more than a diner. It was a sanctuary. A relic from a bygone era with cracked red vinyl seats, a smell of stale coffee and frying oil that had seeped into the walls, and a jukebox that only played classics from the 50s. It was our ritual, our decompression chamber after every deployment, every high-stakes mission. We slid into our usual booth in the back corner. The familiar waitress, Betty, a woman who had served us for years and never asked any questions, brought over a pot of coffee without being asked. The clatter of plates, the low hum of conversation, the feeling of being home, it washed over me like a balm. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only exists between people who have faced death together. We didn't talk about the mission, or the review board, or Sterling. We talked about Mac's daughter's soccer game, about Chen's latest project restoring an old motorcycle, about Duke's disastrous attempt at online dating. Sitting there, watching them laugh, the events of the last 3 months unspooled in my mind. It started with Sterling's condescending smirk in that bar, his eyes sliding over me as if I were the hired entertainment, not the team leader. I remembered the heat of humiliation, quickly banked into a cold, hard ember of resolve. I remembered the long weeks of training, of pushing the team, of proving my worth to myself over and over, not because they doubted me, but because the world outside our bubble always would. The mission had been the crucible. The chilling wrongness in that valley, the crackle of Sterling's voice in my ear demanding we proceed, the absolute clarity of the trap. The fear had been real, a live wire in my chest. But beneath it was a deeper current, a certainty forged in 100 training exercises and a dozen real-world ops. The trust in Mac's steady presence at my six, in Chen's quiet genius weaving a digital shield around us, in Duke's ferocious loyalty forming an impenetrable wall. I had used Sterling's underestimation, just as I always had. He saw a woman who hesitated, my team saw a commander who assessed. He saw disobedience, they saw salvation. Mac nudged my coffee cup with his own, the ceramic clinking softly. "You're a million miles away, Captain." I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. Mac, the unwavering father figure. Chen, the silent, brilliant anchor. Duke, the passionate protector. My family. "No," I said, a genuine, easy smile finally breaking through. "I'm right here." And I was. The ghost of the bar incident, the lingering doubt that even I sometimes harbored, had been exorcised not by the review board's verdict, but by the choices made in the dust and the dark. The respect I had now wasn't given. It was earned, bullet by bullet, decision by decision. It was etched into the very fabric of our bond, a bond stronger than any institutional prejudice, any arrogant intelligence report. The jukebox in the corner clicked and an old Johnny Cash song began to play, filling the diner with its steady, mournful rhythm. Betty refilled our cups, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Outside, the world continued with all its complexities and conflicts. But here, in this booth, in the warm, greasy light of the Dixie Donut, there was only this simple, unshakable truth. We were a team, and I was their leader. Not in spite of who I was, but because of it. The journey from that moment of humiliation to this moment of profound peace had been long and hard, but every step had been worth it. I took a sip of my coffee, the bitter brew tasting like victory.